It's a great turnout. I had no idea what to expect. But you know, when Joe read my it's just the way I wrote it. So he did mention that I am married to my high school sweetheart. So guys, you treat those girlfriends good, because they have long memories. Every day, we make choices. Have you ever stopped to consider how many choices we make each day? We make big choices and little choices, important choices and trivial choices. Choices that only matter for a short time and choices that can live with us for the rest of our lives. This morning, when your alarm went off, you had a choice. You could hit the floor and hit the shower and get to the convocation on time, or maybe that tickle in the throat is the beginning of strep throat, so you said, I'm too sick, I'm not coming to school today. Other decisions that you made this morning was, what are you going to wear today? Long sleeve shirt, sweatshirt, sweater? Have a bowl of cereal or a piece of toast for breakfast, or wait until you got here and have a bagel and a banana? You know, trivial choices, these are. Choices that make a difference for a day, maybe a little bit longer, but not so much. But you have made other choices. Last spring, you filled out your registration form for these fall's classes. And you had to decide which classes you were going to take. College prep, work prep, classes that challenged you, or are you going to slide through this year? Some choices you make on the spur of the moment. When I was a sophomore in high school, I did a really sophomore thing. At the time, I guess I thought that would be a really funny and clever thing to do, but I have to tell you, 45 years later, the hurt that was in that woman's eyes still bothers me today. That was a dumb thing to do. Choices do have consequences. If you hit the weight room 3 times a week in the off season, you're going to be bigger and stronger and probably faster next fall when football starts. That is, of course, unless you choose to ignore the safety rules at the weight room. And then you might injure yourself, and instead of being at captain's practice in the summer, you're going to be in rehab, getting over that injury. Do they still have captain's practices? Nobody's saying anything. So when I was in high school, the football team was prohibited from starting formal practices with the coach. So the coach couldn't be anywhere near the team as they were getting ready for the season. So a couple of weeks before formal football practice started, the captains of the team would call conditioning practices. So that's what I mean by that. You know, in my work as a judge for the last 23 years, I see people every day who have to answer the consequences for the choices they make. In that span of time, I have come across remarkably few truly evil people, and for that I am very grateful. Just about everybody that I see in my work are pretty decent and good people that do really stupid things. Again, some of them are spur-of-the-moment things, and some of them are things that have been planned and strategized more than Coach Nelson is planning for the opening game next fall. Some choices are made so often and so consistently that they become a routine, a habit. You go home in the off season and go for a run to stay in shape, and you do that a few times, and that becomes a habit. And when you then don't go for that run, you kind of miss it. Or you lift a paper off the internet when you're at a deadline for turning in a report at school. And it's so easy that you do it again and again, and pretty soon that becomes a habit. Within the last month, I had a young woman appear before me, probably about the age of many of you in this room. She was charged with giving a false name and date of birth to a police officer and for smoking cigarettes. She and her father were very, very apologetic about giving the officer the false name. She was taking post-secondary classes in a community college, and they just decided to tell her classmates that she was 18 so that she wouldn't have to answer all those other questions about what this 17 or 16-year-old doing here. And frankly, she looked like she could pass for 18 or even 20. But I told her I was less concerned about her giving that false name to a peace officer, which probably would have resulted in maybe a $50 fine, some community work service, and which I was pretty darn sure would never happen again. But I was more concerned about the choice that she was making to smoke cigarettes. That choice has far more serious consequences. My wife's mother started smoking about the same age as that young woman, about the same age as many of the young men in this room. It was a cool thing to do. And those jokes about cigarettes being coffin nails were just that. They were jokes. Well, the cruel joke was on my mother-in-law. She developed emphysema and chronic pulmonary obstructive disorder. The last 3 years of her life were tethered to an oxygen concentrator or a bottle of oxygen. The last 6 months of her life were in the nursing home, where it was awful for the family members to watch her struggle to breathe in enough oxygen to sustain herself. Now, we have a smoking education class out in Sibley County where I usually sit as a judge. And in that, they take one of these little straws, these stir sticks, like you stir your coffee creamer, and they say, put that in your mouth, and close your lips tight about it, and then close your nose, and breathe through that straw. That's what it's like to have emphysema, and that's what it's like to have chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder. And that's what my mother-in-law was going through. She lived long enough to see a photograph of her first great-grandson. But there's no reason she couldn't have seen the other 6 or 5. But she didn't. She died when she was 67. Choices that she made when she was your age came back to haunt her and cut her life short. 67 seems like a pretty old person to a kid in high school, even I remember those days. But when you get to be my age, it's pretty young. I want to play with my grandson. I want to see them graduate from high school. I see people every week who make the choice to drive home after they've had a little bit too much to drink. Talk about your consequences. Even if they manage to avoid getting into an accident where they would seriously hurt or possibly kill someone, in which case they stand a very good chance of spending months and months in the state penitentiary, they're going to lose their driver's license for 5 years. No, that's for the more serious one. Even a simple, quote-unquote, DUI has serious, serious consequences. In addition to having to go to court, paying hundreds of dollars in fines, the threat of going to jail if you fail on probation, you lose their driver's license for 30 days as minimum, have to pay hundreds of dollars to the state of Minnesota to get it back, and are on risk insurance for several years after. Then, they fill out that application for college, for graduate school, for that job that they really, really want. And at the least, they're going to have the embarrassment of explaining that little blip on their record. At the worst, they won't get a chance to explain, because they won't even get an interview. Or they're heading to Canada, go fishing with a buddy, and are shocked to find out that they are arrested at the border for attempting to enter that country illegally. Canadians take driving under the influence a lot more seriously than Americans do. And that's not a made-up story. I know people that's happened to. Then there are those choices that are the natural consequences of our attitudes. And these can be the most troublesome and troubling of them all. These include the athlete who was disrespected, and I don't even know if that's a word, but that's how he explained it to me, who threw a punch and knocked out a tooth to the guy that disrespected him. That's a felony offense in the state of Minnesota. If you're convicted of a felony, you can't vote. You can't go hunting because you can't carry a firearm, and you're probably disqualified from your student loans. That athlete was very surprised to discover that he was lucky because he had a prosecutor who didn't want those kinds of dire consequences to attach to this young man. So he let him plead out to a less serious offense, keep that felony off his record. Then there are the hate crimes, and man, do I hate to see them come to my courtroom. Crimes that are caused by picking on a person because of his race, his sex, nationality, religion, or sexual orientation. Lots of times these activities don't rise to the level of criminal offenses, but they are so very, very troubling and difficult to deal with when they do. And then there's that national epidemic of domestic violence. This, I believe, is also a matter of choice. And I'm going to just talk about men committing domestic violence against women for 2 reasons here this morning. Reason number 1 is probably 95% of the cases that I deal with, and unfortunately I deal with these every day almost, 95% of them involve male against female violence. Now, there are some where the woman is the aggressor and is charged with this offense. And there are others where you have the same-sex relationship, but mostly it's men against women. And the second reason is, I'm talking to a bunch of men here today, so I don't have to talk about the other stuff. You know, hardly a season goes by when some professional athlete is not charged with domestic violence against his wife or his significant other. Mike Haywood was the University of Pittsburgh football coach for, 2.5 weeks before he was charged with domestic violence and was summarily dismissed from that job by the university. And I'm not going to get into whether, the presumption of innocence and the burden of proof and all that stuff. I just want to say that I believe the University of Pittsburgh acted very prudently in getting that issue behind them, because that could have lingered on, affected their recruiting, affected a whole bunch of other things. These negative attitudes thrive in an aura of a lack of respect and a sense of entitlement. And you, as student athletes, are particularly vulnerable to these mindsets. You have the cheerleaders and the student bodies that are pumping you up before the game, congratulating you when you're victorious, that tell you how wonderful you are because you pancaked that defensive lineman, or you made the one-handed grab in the end zone, or you sacked the opposing quarterback, or you made the cornerback look silly when you with that spin move to get away from his tackle. The problem is, when you start confusing the fact that you are a wonderful football player, and then jump to the conclusion that you're a wonderful person. And that is just not necessarily so. That kind of attitude leads you to believe that it's all right to bump that traffic cop, and she's trying to prevent you from making that right-hand turn, but you are convinced that you're privileged to make it the time. Or you should be able to tell your girlfriend that she should stay home on a Saturday night while you go out with your buddies. And it's not just the student athletes that get caught up in this. It's the coaches and the families that can too. I recall a case that I had. I've been a judge for 23 years, and I sit in 5 different counties, so I can't tell you the names and stuff because juvenile court records are confidential. But I had a young football player in front of me who was charged with vandalism, damaging someone else's property. His father appeared in court with him and made an impassioned plea that I should cut his son some slack because just the week before, a Division I football coach, and if I could tell you his name, you'd all recognize him even these years later, was sitting in his living room telling his son what a great football player he was and how he wanted to come to play for his program the next year. And I'm sitting up on the judge's bench and I'm thinking to myself, what in the world does this have to do with this young man trashing someone else's property? It was unbelievable. In the grand scheme of things, the crime that this young man committed was not all that serious. It wasn't that horrific. I put him on probation. I made him apologize, pay for the damages that he did, and do some community work service to make restitution. I did see him in court again a few months later. He was involved in a minor traffic accident that was his fault. But other than that, I didn't really have any other contact with him. And I do know that he went on to play for a Division I nationally ranked football team and was even drafted into the NFL. I don't know if he's still playing or how he did in the NFL. We must all pay for the consequences for the choices we make. Our court system recognizes that young people, by definition, are different than adults. They don't have the maturity of the adults, so we set up juvenile court to treat them differently. We know that kids make mistakes. Well, guess what? Adults make mistakes too. Whether it's pulling a chair out from underneath a classmate, trashing someone else's property, drinking before you're 21, driving under the influence of alcohol, smoking, no one of us is able to lead a perfect life. We all, each one of us, make poor choices, and we, each one of us, have to live with the consequences of our actions. On the other hand, when we make a mistake, it is not the end of the world. Even a horrible mistake. Consequences must be paid, but life goes on, and we must recover, and we must learn. Sometimes the bad things that happen to us are our own fault, and sometimes they are not. Stuff just happens. Either way, the trick is to learn from the bad times. Let me tell you another very sad case that I was involved in. Excuse me. This one you could actually read about. It's an old story, but it's still on the Minnesota Public Radio website. It's called Finding Justice in a Tragic End. I can't remember exactly how it all started, but I think it was over a girl. There was a young fellow from Faribault named Freddie, and he got into a little argument with some guys from Waterville. And there was some trash talk, and the guys from Waterville threw down the gauntlet. "Now, come on over. We'll settle this once and for all." So Freddie got a bunch of his buddies, and they went over to Waterville, and a fight ensued. Freddie's best friend was there to keep track of his buddy, watch his back. And Freddie's friend was starting to get the worst of the fight that he was in. So he jumped into his pickup truck and closed the door and locked all the doors. And the kids from Waterville were pounding on the hood of the truck. So he put the truck in reverse and backed out to get away. He backed over Freddie, and he killed him. His best friend. Several weeks later, I was in court in Leesburg County when many of the young men who were at that fracas were summoned to answer to criminal complaints. Freddie's mom did not want anybody charged with manslaughter or criminal vehicular operation or anything like that. But she just wanted justice to be done. So they were charged with underage drinking, disorderly conduct, assault, fighting. One thing that you find out in court proceedings, without going to too many of them, is that they're often not the best places to get resolution on serious personal issues. They're very good places for determining the truth, for finding guilt and innocence, for setting penalties. But they're very poor places to start to try and put back relationships that have been damaged or destroyed. So when I entered the courtroom that day and saw all these young guys, and of course I'd heard the story about what happened to Freddie before I got on the bench, I could sense the frustration and anger and the fear that was among all those folks there. But again, I was lucky, and those young men were lucky, because the prosecutor agreed with me that this was a case where what we did in court would not matter that much. So we tried something new, a little restorative justice. And in this case, it meant that all the young men and their families who were involved in this would get together with the trained facilitator and talk about what happened that night. And Freddie's mom and dad were there, too. I think Freddie's girlfriend was there. And of course, there was a trained facilitator. It was, I understand, a very hard session. But let me just read a little bit from the public radio report about what happened that night. The Faribault-Waterville conferencing got off to a rocky start. In a room heavy with tension and hurt, the Faribault teens and their parents sat on one side of the room, and the Waterville teens and their parents sat on the other. The mediator and Freddie's sister and Freddie's mom, Lori Schultz, sat in the middle. Mrs. Schultz said, "I was at the point that I had listened to Freddie's friends in town, listened to how they felt, and I couldn't stand those Waterville kids. I was so angry at them for this fight." And the reporter went on to say that sometime during the hours of raw emotion and tears and questions, each side began to listen to what the other was saying. Mom said, "I forgave the driver. I always have. I've never blamed him at all. And I told him the night of the mediation that, and you could just see the relief in his eyes. And all those boys who were Freddie's, they just broke down and cried. It was hard, but about halfway through, everybody sat back and relaxed, and it turned out to be a pretty cool thing." Freddie's mom said the mediation gave her a sense of relief of being able to speak with all these kids and parents and hear how they felt and let them hear how I feel. "I felt so much anger before I went to the mediation, and I walked out of there with a sense of relief. I told my husband that I feel that Freddie's spirit has been lifted now because I was holding it." Well, in this case, the teens figured out their own penalty with the assistance of the mediator. I just had to prove it. They wrote essays about the experience. They had to pick up trash together, the Faribault kids and the Waterville kids, on 2 miles of highway between the two towns. Plant a tree in Freddie's name and go and visit his grave on the anniversary of his death. And that year, that anniversary was Mother's Day. The choices we make. The choices we have to live with. I have to live with pulling out a chair from a young woman in high school. You know, and frankly, I have to live with a lot of other stuff that I just don't feel comfortable sharing with you guys today. Freddie's best friend has to live with the fact that he was the cause of his friend's death. But he has. I understand he's moved on and he's living a productive and a good adult life. There's a little book that I've read. It was hard to read for me. I don't know why, but it's called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the little quotes that Professor Covey has in there is, you can't talk your way out of something that you acted your way into. You spend years and years and years building up your reputation, and in one stupid night, it can be severely damaged or destroyed. Your folks trust you, but when they get that call to come and pick you up at the police station, that trust is gone or severely diminished. You can and you will say, I'm sorry, because you are, in fact, men of character. But actions do speak louder than words. My mom used to tell us kids, and I'm the oldest of 8, she'd tell us, sorry doesn't make it better. And you know, she was right. Sorry doesn't take away the hurt. It doesn't fix the vase that we broke. Only time and effort and acting like the men we want to be remembered as can make it better. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for your kind attention here this morning. I'm going to close here with a brief poem, and then I hope we have a few minutes for some questions and answers, because I'm listening, anxious to hear what's on your mind. And, you know, you don't often get a chance to ask judges questions. Usually it's the other way around, so I'm looking forward to that. But I'd like to close with a poem. It's called The Paradoxical Commandments, written by a fellow by the name of Kent Keith in 1968 as a part of a booklet for student leaders. People are unreasonable, illogical, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people may accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you are successful, you will win some false friends and some true enemies. Succeed anyway. If you are honest and frank, people may cheat you. Be honest and frank anyway. What you spend years building, someone could destroy overnight. Build anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, they may be justice. Be happy anyway. The good you do today, people will often forget tomorrow. Do good anyway. Give the world the best you have, and it may never be good enough. Give the world the best you have. You see, in the final analysis, it's between you and your principles. It was never between you and them. Anyway. Thank you, gentlemen. I'd be happy to field some questions. Don't miss your chance. You may never get to ask a judge a question again. Yes? An interesting issue. How did I make the decision to go into law? Because my dad wanted me to be a doctor. And when I finally told my dad that me and blood don't mix too good, he said, well, okay, then lawyer's the next best thing. And I honestly don't know if that's why, but I've always felt, I remember when I graduated from 8th grade and went off from the little town in Greenisle, the elementary school we had there, and went to the big school in Arlington, 7 miles away, where we had maybe 95 in my graduating class, maybe, I stretched it. Well, in 8th grade, my first grade teacher said, what do you think you want to do when you get older? I said, I think I'm going to be a lawyer. And boy, it's been a great career for me. I got to tell you, I'm glad that I'm at the end of my career, not starting, because there are lawyers out there right now that graduate from law school and they can't find a job. They're waiting tables and other stuff just for clearing tables. So I hope that'll turn around with the rest of the economy. That's why I became a judge, a lawyer. It's been a great career for me. I've enjoyed it a lot. Yes. Thank you. The question is it difficult for me to separate myself from the emotionally charged cases that come before me? And the question specified domestic abuse, but there are a lot of other ones too. There are cases that involve children getting hurt. All those are tough. And they can be domestic abuse, but they could be other things too. They could be a child protection case where the mother is a meth addict and is using meth during the pregnancy. I've got one of those pending right now. And the county wants to take their kids away from them. Those are hard. So the question is, how do I deal with it? I'm very, very, very fortunate because I have always been able to separate my business life, my professional life, from my personal life. Yeah, I go home a lot of nights and I hug my wife and I hug my kids and thank the good Lord that I'm blessed as I am. I know there are a lot of people out there that are not. But you get those cases that gnaw at you, and you just have to find ways to live with it. 23 years being a judge, and I bet I have less than 5 cases that I really wonder about. Usually cases, I do the best I can with what I have, and I move on to the next case because there's always a next case. You know, I'm leaving here and I'm going to Chaska, and I know I've got 3 or 4 contested criminal hearings this morning, and I've got 4 or 5 this afternoon. So I don't have time to wonder too much about what I'm doing. I just trust my instincts. I trust the lawyers that are going to give me the information that I need, and I just do the best I can. One of my favorite quotes from the Old Testament is, what the Lord requires of you: do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with your God. And I try and do that every day. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard. Yes, sir. Most troubling trend I'm seeing is a juvenile. It's this lack of respect and sense of entitlement. It's not just student athletes. And it's not just kids, quite frankly. When I first started practicing law in 1974, if you were called for jury duty, you put on a dress if you were a woman, and you put on a coat and a tie if you were a man. And the same if you had to come to court to appear before a judge. I used to be able to tell my clients when I was practicing law, you're going to court, you dress like you're going to church, because back in those days, that meant a coat and a tie, and you looked stiff if your hair was combed. Now I see guys coming into the court with cutoffs and T-shirts, and they just don't care and don't respect themselves. And I had a young woman in court this week that came in and slouched down in her chair and was really, really snotty. And she was another one that was smoking and gave the officer her sister's name. So it's not a serious charge. But, the county attorney said, well, Judge, we're recommending she do the smoking education class and that she do 8 hours of community work service. And she got so snotty, I just looked and said, I think you deserve 16 hours of community work service. And then she made another smart remark, and I said, would you like to try for 24? And she finally said, no, she thought 16 would be just fine. She was a little bit better after that. It's that lack of attitude and sense of entitlement, and honestly, for you dads and moms in the audience, it's the fact that too often I get parents that are unreasonably sticking up for their kids and criticizing law enforcement and probation and other people in the system. When my kids were in high school and started to drive, I told them, you know what, there's 2 kinds of police officers in this world. There's the one that when they stop your car and look in the driver's seat and see you're the judge's child, they're going to let you go. And then there's the other that's going to stop you and look in the driver's seat and see the see that you're the judge's kid, and they're going to be just tickled to write you a ticket. I said, and you're not going to know until those red lights go on which one is behind. So don't come looking to me to get you off, because it ain't going to happen. We have to take our consequences. And sometimes those consequences are hard. And yeah, my kids have all been in court. And the consequences are hard, but they got to learn. My dad used to tell me, I wish that I could somehow impart to you all the mistakes that I made so that you won't make them. Well, I appreciate that, Dad, and now being the father of 3 adult children, I could appreciate that even more. I wish I could have imparted those to my kids. But I realized pretty quick I can't. We all make our mistakes. Sometimes they're the same mistakes our parents made, and sometimes they're different, but we all make them. And the trick is to learn from them. The worst thing that can happen to you is to have success first thing out of the box. You don't learn from that. You learn from your mistakes. That's why you have football practice. You make a mistake over and over and over again, and finally, I got it now. That's true. That's life. Football doesn't teach you how to win. Football teaches you how to lose. It does. It teaches you that when you get knocked down, you pick yourself up and you line up and you get ready for the next play. And there's no time for feeling sorry for yourself, and there's no time to do anything else other than learn that guy on the other side of the line is not going to do that to me again. I'm learning here. That's life, my friends. Anything else? Hey, you guys have been great. You've asked some great questions. I really appreciate I'm so impressed that you football players and staff and parents here have started this program. It's so very important. Football players especially. All athletes, but football players got a little attitude that other sports don't. It's important for you to know that there's a life out there besides football. And I'm just so tickled, and I may even come back and sit in the audience here sometime and listen to some of the other mentor guys who are coming. But you get some great speakers coming. Good luck in your season. Thank you. Oh. And thanks for the hat. I'm going to put this to good use.